I was kneeling in the backyard, watching Eliza draw a rainbow on the patio stones, when the side gate creaked open. My daughter looked up from her chalk, her small fingers smudged with purple and gold. She had been working on that mural all morning, a rainbow arching over a little house, flowers in every color she owned. The afternoon sun filtered through Grandma Ruth's oak tree, the one she planted 40 years ago, and for a moment everything felt peaceful, safe, like the world outside our fence could not touch us here. Then I saw my father. Gerald Morrison walked into my backyard without knocking, without calling, without any warning at all. Behind him came a woman I had never seen before, clutching a clipboard, wearing a blazer with a real estate logo stitched across the pocket. My father did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He stopped in the middle of the yard, surveyed the property like a man appraising cattle, and spoke 6 words that changed everything. "Stop being selfish. Your sister needs this yard." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could form a single word, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Teresa stepped out first, sunglasses perched on her head, smiling like she had already won something. Her husband Kevin followed, hands in his pockets, that smirk he always wore when he knew a secret I did not. And then the twins. Mason and Mia, 6 years old, grabbing their scooters from the trunk and racing toward the backyard like they owned it. Mason reached the patio first. He rode his scooter directly through the center of Eliza's chalk drawing, his wheels cutting through the rainbow she had spent hours creating. Mia followed, giggling, crushing the flowers beneath her. In 3 seconds, my daughter's entire morning was just smeared color on concrete. Eliza did not cry. She did not scream or push back or demand an apology. She simply bent down, gathered her broken chalk pieces, and stepped aside. She made herself smaller. She made room. I watched my 8-year-old daughter shrink herself to accommodate people who did not even see her, and something inside my chest cracked open. The realtor would not meet my eyes. She kept glancing at my father, then at the ground, her pen tapping nervously against her clipboard. She knew something was wrong here. She just did not care enough to say it. Gerald cleared his throat, adopting the tone he always used when delivering commands dressed up as reason. He explained that Teresa and Kevin lived in a cramped apartment. The twins needed space to run, to play, to grow. This house had a big yard, a beautiful yard. It was only logical that the children who needed it should have it. "The house will be listed next week," he said. "I have already contacted the realtor. We will get a fair price." I tried to interrupt. I asked, what about me? What about Eliza? Where exactly were we supposed to go? My father waved his hand like he was brushing away a fly. "There is a garage apartment on the property," he said. "Small but adequate. You can stay there, temporarily, until you figure something out." Teresa sighed dramatically beside him, one hand pressed to her chest like she was accepting an award for suffering. She talked about how hard it had been, raising twins in that tiny apartment. She talked about sacrifice. She never once looked at me while she spoke. Then she turned to Kevin and muttered something under her breath. I caught only fragments. "Well, Mom already agreed to..." She stopped mid-sentence. Kevin shot her a sharp look. She changed the subject immediately, but I had heard enough. Mom knew, my mother knew about this, and she had not warned me. I asked how any of this was possible. The house belonged to Grandma Ruth. Ruth left it to me. I had the paperwork. I had been paying property taxes for 3 years, maintaining the garden, replacing the roof when it leaked last winter. Gerald reached into the realtor's bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a document I had never seen before, a revised version of Ruth's will. According to this paper, Ruth left everything to Gerald. He was the legal owner now. He could sell whenever he wanted. I stared at the page. The will I received after Ruth's death was clear. The house was mine. I remembered the lawyer reading it aloud. I remembered crying in that office, feeling like Ruth was still protecting me even after she was gone. But this document told a different story. And when I looked closely at Ruth's signature at the bottom, something felt wrong. The letters were too jagged, too uncertain. The handwriting did not match the woman who had taught me to write my name in careful cursive. When I pointed this out, Gerald snatched the paper back. He said I was being paranoid. He said this was exactly why no one in the family took me seriously. Always making problems. Always being difficult. Eliza tugged at my sleeve. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" That question broke something inside me that I did not know could still break. I looked at my daughter, this brave little girl who had already been abandoned once before I adopted her, and I saw her wondering if she was the problem, if her existence was the reason we were being thrown out. Then I looked at my family. My father, who had borrowed money from me for years and never repaid a cent. Teresa, whose credit card debt I paid off twice. Kevin, whose failed business was funded by a loan I gave him, a loan that somehow became a gift when repayment came due. I had been their safety net, their backup plan, their ATM with a heartbeat, and the moment I had something they wanted, they came to take it. The twins got birthday presents from my parents every year. Eliza got nothing. The family photos on my father's mantle showed Teresa's children, their milestones, their smiling faces. Eliza appeared in none of them. To my family, she was not real. She was just the girl I collected after Marcus died. Teresa laughed at something Kevin whispered. It was the same laugh I remembered from childhood, the laugh she used whenever she got what she wanted and I did not. For a moment, I did what I had always done. I went quiet. I nodded. I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should just accept this. My mind started cataloging what I would need to move into the garage apartment. How I would explain to Eliza that our home was not really ours. How I would squeeze our lives into 200 square feet and pretend it was enough. But then I looked at my daughter again, still holding those broken chalk pieces, still standing aside, still making herself invisible so others could take up more space. If I accepted this, I would teach her that love requires erasure, that belonging means disappearing, that she should spend her whole life shrinking. Gerald walked over and put a hand on my shoulder, the way he always did when delivering bad news wrapped in false kindness. "Your mother agrees, by the way. She called me last night. She thinks this is the best solution for everyone. Diane, my mother, the one person I thought might defend me, she knew about this. She approved it. And she said nothing." Gerald walked away to join Teresa and Kevin. They huddled together near the oak tree, pointing at different parts of the yard, already planning their future in my home. And I stood alone, holding my daughter's hand, realizing that in this family, I had always been alone. But something pressed against my hip. In my pocket, I felt the edge of an old envelope, one I found in Ruth's jewelry box last week but never opened. Her handwriting on the front. "For Rosalind, when you need it most." I did not know it yet, but my grandmother had been waiting for this moment. She had been preparing for it long before she died. The house was silent now. Gerald had driven away without saying goodbye. Teresa loaded the twins into her SUV with promises of ice cream. The realtor escaped as quickly as she could, avoiding my eyes until the very last moment. Even the birds in Ruth's oak tree had stopped singing, as if they understood that something sacred had been violated. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall where Grandma Ruth's clock still ticked. 9:47 in the evening. I had not eaten since breakfast. My coffee had gone cold twice. I kept replaying my father's words, searching for the moment where I misunderstood, the angle where this made sense. I found nothing. Eliza was finally asleep. It took 3 stories instead of 1. She kept asking questions I could not answer. Why did Grandpa seem angry? Why did the boy break her drawing? Why were those people measuring our yard? I told her everything would be okay. I did not know if that was true. The envelope sat on the table in front of me, the one I found in Ruth's jewelry box last week. Her handwriting stared back at me like a message from another world. "For Rosalind, when you need it most." I had meant to open it a dozen times. Something always interrupted. Something always seemed more urgent. Now nothing was more urgent than understanding what my grandmother wanted me to know. But before I could tear the seal, my mind drifted backward. To the last time I saw my mother. To the conversation that should have warned me. 3 weeks ago, I visited my parents for Sunday dinner. Gerald was locked in his study, as usual, doing whatever important things he claimed required privacy. Diane was alone in the kitchen, washing dishes by hand even though the dishwasher sat empty beside her. She always did that when she was anxious. Kept her hands busy so no one would notice they were shaking. I asked if everything was okay. She hesitated too long before answering. "Fine," she said. "Everything is fine." But her eyes kept darting toward Gerald's study door like she expected it to burst open at any moment. She dried her hands slowly, then turned to face me. She started to speak. "Honey, I need to tell you about something. Your father has been talking to some people about the house. About Ruth's house. He thinks that maybe—" The study door opened. Gerald appeared in the doorway watching us with that expression he wore when he suspected disloyalty. Diane's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Her voice became bright and artificial. She asked about Eliza's school. She complimented my haircut. She became a different person, the person Gerald required her to be. When I hugged her goodbye at the door, she held on longer than usual. Her arms tightened around me like she was memorizing the feeling. She whispered something into my shoulder. "I am sorry." Just those 2 words. I asked what she meant. She shook her head and pulled away. Her eyes were wet. I thought she was just being emotional. Diane had always been anxious, always apologizing for things that were not her fault. I did not push. I drove home and forgot about it until tonight. Now I understood. She knew. She knew what Gerald was planning, and she tried to warn me, but she could not find the courage to finish the sentence. I sat alone in Ruth's kitchen and began counting. Not the years, the dollars, the sacrifices, the times I said yes when everything inside me screamed no. 3 years ago, Gerald called in a panic. His voice cracked like a teenager's. He had made bad investments. He needed $15,000 immediately or he would lose his house. He swore he would pay me back within 6 months. I emptied my savings account that same afternoon. He never mentioned repayment. I never asked. That was the unspoken rule. Family does not keep score. 2 years ago, Teresa's credit card debt reached $40,000. Shopping addiction, she claimed, a disease she could not control. She said she would lose everything, her credit, her marriage, her children's future. I paid it off in a single transfer to save my sister from bankruptcy. She bought a new Mercedes the following month. 18 months ago, Kevin approached me with a business plan, a landscaping company. He needed $20,000 for equipment. I made him sign a loan agreement, actual paperwork, witnesses, payment schedule. His company failed within 6 months. When I asked about repayment, Gerald called me heartless. The loan became a family gift. The paperwork disappeared from Kevin's files. $80,000 in 3 years. Money I could have saved for Eliza's college. Money I could have used to renovate this house. Money that vanished into my family's pockets and was never acknowledged, never appreciated, never returned. I remembered now that Gerald started asking about Ruth's house value right after Kevin's business loan. Just casual questions. Just curious. He wanted to know what property in this neighborhood was selling for, what the market was doing, whether old houses like Ruth's were worth renovating or better to tear down. I thought he was making conversation. I did not realize he was appraising his inheritance. Eliza had been part of my life for 5 years now. I adopted her 2 years after Marcus died, when she was 3 years old. A foster child with no living relatives. Quiet eyes that had seen too much. I recognized something in her the first time we met. 2 broken people who might make each other whole. When I announced the adoption, Gerald asked why I would want to raise someone else's problem. Those were his exact words. Someone else's problem. Teresa laughed nervously but did not disagree. Diane said nothing at all. Every Christmas since then, Gerald and Diane sent elaborate gifts for Mason and Mia. Matching outfits, expensive toys, cards signed with love for our beloved grandchildren. Eliza received a gift card. $25 to a store she had never visited. Some years they forgot her birthday entirely. On the wall in Gerald's living room, there is a shrine of family photographs. Teresa's wedding, the twins' baptism, Gerald's retirement party. I appear in exactly 2 pictures, both from more than a decade ago. Eliza appears in none. Last Thanksgiving, we gathered at Gerald's house for dinner. Mia asked loudly why Eliza did not look like anyone else in the family. The table went silent. Teresa smiled and answered before I could speak. Because she is not really family, sweetie. She is just living with Aunt Rosalind. Eliza heard everything. She pretended she did not, but she stopped eating after that. She asked to go home early. She did not speak the entire drive back. I found myself standing in Eliza's bedroom, pulling a suitcase from the closet. My hands moved without thinking. I started folding her clothes, preparing to pack, preparing to surrender. The same thing I had done my entire life. Maybe Gerald was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Teresa's twins did need space. I had always been the strong one, the capable one, the one who could handle anything. Maybe handling this meant stepping aside. My phone buzzed on the dresser. A text from Diane. Please do not be angry with me. I had no choice. Your father... The message ended mid-sentence. 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing more. Then they vanished. Nothing else came. I caught my reflection in Eliza's bedroom mirror. I saw my mother's face looking back at me. The same tired eyes. The same bent posture. The same woman who spent her life apologizing for existing. A small voice came from the doorway. Mommy? Eliza stood there in her star pajamas, the ones Ruth bought her 2 months before she died. She looked at the open suitcase on her bed, at her folded clothes, at my face. She walked slowly toward me. She took my hand the way she did when she was first adopted and afraid of everything, and she asked a question that shattered what was left of my heart. Did I do something wrong? Is that why we have to leave? I could not speak. I could not breathe. I pulled her into my arms and held her while something fundamental shifted inside me. All my life I had bent and accommodated and sacrificed. But this was not about me anymore. This was about what I was teaching my daughter, about what love looked like, about whether belonging required disappearing. After Eliza fell asleep again, I returned to the kitchen table. I picked up Ruth's envelope. My hands were steadier now. Anger had replaced fear. Not loud anger. Quiet anger. The kind that builds instead of burns. I slid my finger under the seal. Inside were several pages of Ruth's careful handwriting. A letter dated 6 months before she died. Before the illness took her strength. Before Gerald started visiting more often. The first line made my breath catch. My dearest girl. If you are reading this letter, it means they have finally made their move. I hoped I was wrong about them, but I have watched your father and sister for 60 years, and I know what they are capable of. Ruth knew, she had always known, and she had left me something to fight back with. I stood in Ruth's bedroom past midnight, surrounded by everything she left behind. The lavender bedspread she loved, her reading glasses still resting on the nightstand. The faint scent of rose water that had not faded even after 3 years. I kept this room exactly as it was the day she died. I told myself it was respect. Maybe it was denial. Maybe I was not ready to let go of the last person who truly loved me. The jewelry box sat on her dresser, carved mahogany with mother-of-pearl inlay. Ruth's husband gave it to her on their 40th anniversary, 2 years before he passed. I had opened this box dozens of times since her death. I held her pearl earrings against my ears. I breathed in the sachet tucked inside the velvet lining. I searched for connection, for comfort, for proof that I had not imagined the warmth she gave me. But I never looked for hidden compartments. I never thought to lift the lining. Ruth was not a secretive woman. She said what she meant, and meant what she said, or so I believed. Her letter changed everything. My fingers pressed along the edges of the bottom panel, searching for what she described. A small space, a hidden key, something Gerald was never meant to find. I felt nothing but smooth wood and worn velvet, until my thumb caught a slight ridge near the back corner. I pressed harder. A soft click. The velvet panel lifted to reveal a shallow compartment underneath. And there, resting on a folded piece of paper, was a small brass key, tarnished with age. No label, no explanation, just metal and mystery waiting for me. I carried the key back to the kitchen and spread Ruth's letter across the table. 3 more pages waited beyond the one I had already read. Her handwriting filled every inch, careful and deliberate, the words of a woman who knew she was running out of time. She began by explaining why she changed her will 5 years ago. It happened after Marcus died, after I was alone with a grief I did not know how to carry. Ruth watched how I handled that darkness. She saw me adopt Eliza without hesitation, without demanding guarantees. She watched me become a mother through choice rather than chance. She wrote about Gerald and Teresa, too, how they only visited when they needed something, how Teresa once threw a tantrum when Ruth refused to co-sign a loan, how Gerald suggested Ruth move to a nursing home so he could rent out her house and collect the income. They saw her as a resource, not a person, an inheritance waiting to happen. I knew then, Ruth wrote, that if I left anything to your father, it would disappear within a year. Teresa would spend it on things she does not need. Gerald would lose it to another failed investment. But you, my darling girl, you would make this house a home. You would plant flowers in my garden. You would raise Eliza in these rooms and remember me with love. One paragraph near the bottom of the page was smudged, the ink blurred by what looked like dried tears. I had to hold the paper up to the light to read it. I am sorry I did not protect you sooner. I watched them treat you like a servant your whole life. I watched them take and take while you gave and gave. And I said nothing. I was afraid of losing my son entirely. I was a coward. Please forgive me. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from crying. Ruth had seen everything. She understood what I never let myself admit. And she carried that guilt to her grave. The second page explained the legal situation. Ruth created her original will with a lawyer named Margaret Chen, an old friend from her church group. That will clearly stated that the house and her savings would go to me. Gerald received nothing, not because Ruth did not love him, but because she had already given him more than his share. But 6 months before Ruth died, Gerald began pressuring her to change everything. He brought his own lawyer to the house. He talked about tax advantages. He talked about family unity. He talked in circles until Ruth did not know which way was up. Ruth wrote that she pretended to be more confused than she actually was. She signed the papers Gerald wanted her to sign because fighting him took energy she no longer had, but she also kept her original will safe with Margaret Chen. She never told Gerald about Margaret. She never mentioned the second copy. I do not know which will would hold up in court, Ruth admitted. I am not a lawyer, I just wanted to give you a fighting chance. If they come for the house, find Margaret. She has everything you need. Then came a passage that made my blood run cold. Your father visited me 4 times in the last month of my life. Teresa came twice. They brought papers every time. They waited until I was exhausted, until the pain medication made my mind cloudy. They asked me to sign things I did not fully understand. I signed because I wanted them to leave. I signed because I was tired of fighting. I signed because dying takes so much energy, there was nothing left for resistance. Gerald had preyed on a dying woman, his own mother. He had waited until she was too weak to defend herself, and then took everything. The third page explained the key. Years ago, Ruth opened a safety deposit box at First Heritage Bank downtown. She never told anyone about it. Not Gerald, not Diane, not even her husband until just before he died. Inside that box, she stored her original will, notarized and witnessed. She stored documentation of every dollar Gerald and Teresa extracted from her over 3 decades. Bank statements, Canceled checks, written IOUs that were never honored. A paper trail of financial exploitation stretching back longer than I had been alive. I kept these records not for revenge, Ruth wrote. I kept them because I knew someday you might need proof. Proof that you were never the selfish one. Proof that you gave everything while they only took. The small brass key opened that safety deposit box. Ruth arranged for me to be listed as co-owner, though I never knew. Margaret Chen had the access documentation. Then Ruth mentioned one more thing. A final gift I did not see coming. I also left something for Eliza. A letter written just for her. And a small inheritance separate from the house. I wanted her to know that she was my granddaughter in every way that matters. Blood is just an accident. Love is a choice. And I chose her the moment I saw how you loved her. I set the letter down because I could not see through my tears. Ruth had thought of everything. Ruth had protected us both. And she had done it all while dying, while Gerald circled her like a vulture waiting for the last breath. The fourth page described the years Ruth spent watching Gerald become someone she did not recognize. She traced it back to his childhood, to patterns she should have broken but did not. She blamed herself for his cruelty. She blamed herself for Teresa's greed. She blamed herself for creating a family that fed on its weakest members. Near the end, Ruth mentioned catching Gerald in her office late one night. She pretended to be asleep as he rifled through her desk, her filing cabinet, the places he thought she might hide important documents. He did not find what he was looking for. She had already moved everything. The final page contained practical information. Margaret Chen's name and address. An office on Congress Avenue in downtown Austin. A phone number. Office hours. Beneath the contact details, Ruth added a warning in underlined text. Do not tell anyone in the family about Margaret. Not your mother. Not anyone. They cannot know. I read that line 3 times. Not your mother. Ruth specifically excluded Diane. Which meant Ruth knew my mother could not be trusted. Diane would tell Gerald. Diane would compromise everything. I thought about my mother's incomplete text message. The apology without explanation. The silence that followed. Diane was not innocent. She might not be the architect of this betrayal, but she was complicit. She had chosen Gerald over me, just like she always did. The kitchen clock read 2:14 in the morning. In a few hours, Eliza would wake up asking questions I still could not answer. But now I had a path forward. I had Margaret Chen's name. I had a key to a safety deposit box. I had proof that my grandmother loved me enough to fight from beyond the grave. I would call Margaret tomorrow. I would learn exactly what Ruth left behind. I would understand my options before Gerald could make another move. My phone lit up on the counter. A text from Teresa, sent at this ungodly hour. I know you are upset. Let us talk tomorrow, just us sisters. I will come by at noon. We can work something out. She had ended the message with a heart emoji. Teresa had never sent me a heart emoji in 35 years. She never offered to talk things out. She never suggested compromise. Everything about this message felt wrong. She wanted something. She knew something. Or she was trying to find out what I knew. I turned off my phone and pressed Ruth's key against my palm. Tomorrow, everything would change. I just had to survive until then. I drove through downtown Austin with my hands tight on the steering wheel, watching the clock on my dashboard count down the minutes I did not have. 9:15 in the morning. Teresa was coming to the house at noon. That gave me 2 hours and 45 minutes to find Margaret Chen, understand what Ruth left behind, and get back before my sister could discover I was gone. The city looked different through the windshield. Glass towers had replaced the small shops I remembered from childhood. Coffee places charged $8 for drinks I could make at home. Austin had grown up while I was busy surviving, and I barely recognized the streets anymore. Margaret Chen's office was in an older building on Congress Avenue, red brick with white trim, wedged between a modern high-rise and a taco restaurant. It was the kind of building that refused to sell, refused to change, refused to disappear no matter how much money developers offered. I liked it immediately. It reminded me of Ruth. The brass key pressed against my hip through my pocket. I had not let it out of my sight since finding it in the jewelry box. It felt like carrying a piece of Ruth herself, a talisman against the family that wanted to erase us both. I climbed narrow stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled like old books and lemon polish. A frosted glass door read, "Margaret Chen, attorney at law," in gold lettering that had faded but not peeled. I knocked twice and waited. The woman who opened the door was in her late 60s, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She wore a burgundy cardigan over a crisp white blouse. She looked like someone's grandmother. She also looked like someone who had won a lot of fights. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You look just like her," she said. "Ruth talked about you constantly. Please come in." Her office was lined with bookshelves, every wall covered in legal volumes and framed photographs. I spotted Ruth in one picture, younger than I ever knew her, laughing at some long-ago church picnic. Margaret and Ruth stood arm in arm like sisters who had chosen each other. Margaret explained that she and Ruth were friends for over 40 years. They met at First Methodist when their children were young. Ruth was the maid of honor at Margaret's second wedding. Margaret was the first person Ruth called after her stroke. "I visited her every week at the end," Margaret said, her voice catching. "She told me things she could not tell anyone else. She was afraid, Rosalind. Not of dying. She was ready for that. She was afraid of what would happen to you after she was gone." Margaret retrieved a thick folder from her filing cabinet and spread its contents across her desk. The tab read, "Ruth Morrison Estate." Inside, documents were organized with colored tabs and sticky notes, each one a piece of a puzzle Ruth assembled over years. She slid a paper toward me. "This is your grandmother's original will," she said, "dated 5 years ago." Ruth's signature was strong and clear at the bottom. The witnesses were legible. The notary stamp was crisp. According to this document, the house and all savings went to me. Then Margaret produced another paper. This one was dated 8 months ago, just weeks before Ruth died. The handwriting on the signature line was shaky, almost unreadable. This version left everything to Gerald, with instructions that he distribute assets as he saw fit. Margaret explained the problem. Both wills were technically signed by Ruth. Both had witnesses. Gerald's version was filed with probate court. Margaret's version never made it to the courthouse because Ruth died before they could complete the process. "But I have documentation," Margaret continued. "Medical records show Ruth was on heavy pain medication when the second will was signed. Her home nurse was asked to leave the room when Gerald brought his lawyer. And Ruth gave me a written statement describing the pressure she faced. Then Margaret told me something that made my stomach turn. Ruth said your father brought the new will to her hospital bed. She was barely conscious. He told her if she did not sign, he would make sure you never saw Eliza's adoption finalized. He threatened your daughter to manipulate a dying woman." I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles went white. Gerald had used Eliza as leverage. He had threatened to destroy my family to get what he wanted from his own mother. Margaret leaned back and removed her glasses. She told me the hard truth about challenging Gerald's will in court. It would take 12 to 18 months minimum. Appeals could stretch it to 3 years. Legal fees would run between $30,000 and $50,000. I would need expert witnesses, court costs, depositions where Gerald's lawyer would try to make me look like a greedy troublemaker. And even if I won, Margaret said quietly, the family would be destroyed. Relationships would burn. The victory might feel hollow. She revealed something else. Gerald was not just greedy. He was desperate. Your father took out a second mortgage on his own home 2 years ago. He used the money to cover Teresa's debts and Kevin's failed business. He is underwater by at least $150,000. If he cannot sell Ruth's house quickly, he may lose everything. That explained the urgency, the realtor in my backyard, the timeline that could not wait. Gerald was drowning, and he planned to use my inheritance as a life raft. Margaret asked me to show her the key I found in Ruth's jewelry box. I placed it on her desk, and she picked it up with something like reverence. First Heritage Bank, she confirmed. Downtown branch. Box number 417. You are listed as co-owner. Ruth arranged it years ago, just in case. She described what the box contained. The original will, notarized and witnessed. Financial records documenting every dollar Gerald and Teresa extracted from Ruth over 3 decades. Bank statements, canceled checks, written IOUs that were never honored. Ruth kept meticulous records of every loan that became a gift, every promise that was broken. These records might not hold up in court as standalone evidence, Margaret admitted, but they paint a picture, a pattern. If Gerald claims Ruth left everything to him out of love and gratitude, these documents tell a very different story. Then Margaret mentioned the final item in the box. Ruth left a sealed envelope for Eliza. She wanted your daughter to know she was loved, that she belonged. Ruth called Eliza her true grandchild. She said blood was just an accident, but love was a choice. I sat in silence, trying to process everything. Years of legal battle, tens of thousands of dollars. My family torn apart in public courtrooms, all to recover a house that should have been mine without question. Margaret let the silence stretch. Then she asked a question that cut through everything. What do you actually want? Do you want the house? Do you want justice? Do you want your family to admit what they did? Because those are 3 different things, and they require 3 different strategies. I thought about Eliza, about the chalk drawing destroyed under scooter wheels, about my daughter asking if she did something wrong. I did not need Gerald to apologize. I did not need Teresa to admit anything. I needed Eliza to grow up knowing she belonged somewhere. I needed a home no one could take from us. Margaret nodded as if she expected that answer. Then you do not need to win the war, she said. You need to change the battlefield. She glanced out her window toward the street below, and her expression shifted. She asked a question that seemed casual but felt deliberate. By the way, do you know the house next door to Ruth's is for sale? The Evelyn Porter property? I shook my head. I knew Evelyn. She was Ruth's neighbor for 30 years. Her husband died last year. But I did not know she was selling, Margaret explained. Evelyn wanted to move closer to her children in Seattle. The house was listed reasonably, priced to sell quickly rather than maximize profit. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman with a garden almost as beautiful as Ruth's. I know Evelyn, Margaret said. We attend the same church. Ruth introduced us years ago. Evelyn adored your grandmother. She despised your father. When Gerald approached her about buying the house, she refused to even let him inside. The idea took shape before Margaret finished speaking. If I bought Evelyn's house, I would have a home that no one could take from me. I could watch Gerald sell Ruth's property to pay his debts. I could be right next door, living well, raising my daughter in peace. Not revenge, just freedom. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dropping. There is a catch. Evelyn has another interested buyer. Someone from California with cash. She is deciding this week. If you want that house, you need to move fast. She placed a business card on the desk. Evelyn Porter. A phone number. Call her tonight, Margaret said. Tell her Ruth sent you. That will mean something. I picked up the card, my mind racing through finances, mortgages, possibilities. This was not retreat. This was repositioning. Before you decide anything, Margaret added, go to the bank. Open that safety deposit box. Ruth wanted you to see everything. I think once you do, your path will become clear. I stood to leave, tucking the card and the key into my purse. At the door, I turned back. Margaret smiled, and for a moment she looked like Ruth. Your grandmother would be proud of you, she said. Whatever you choose. I sat in my car outside First Heritage Bank with the engine still running, watching the clock on my dashboard tick toward disaster. 11:20 in the morning. Teresa would arrive at the house at noon. That gave me 40 minutes to uncover whatever Ruth left behind and figure out what to do with it. Every instinct told me to postpone this. Wait for a day when I had more time. Come back when Teresa was not circling like a vulture. But something deeper told me that waiting was exactly what Gerald wanted. Every hour I delayed was another hour he could scheme, manipulate, prepare his next move. Ruth had waited too long. I would not make the same mistake. The bank was Old Austin, limestone facade and brass fixtures, the kind of place where tellers still knew customers by name. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, clutching my purse with the key inside. The lobby smelled like polished marble and old money. A security guard nodded politely. 2 elderly women chatted near the water fountain. A young man in a suit reviewed paperwork at a desk. Everything felt normal, ordinary. No one knew that I was about to open a box that could change my life. My heart pounded against my ribs. My palms were damp. I reminded myself to breathe. Ruth wanted me to find this. Ruth prepared for this moment. I was not trespassing. I was claiming my inheritance. I approached the customer service desk and explained that I needed to access safety deposit box 417. The clerk was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Patricia. She asked for identification, typed something into her computer, frowned slightly, then looked up with surprise. She confirmed that Rosalind Morrison was listed as co-owner of Box 417. The account was established 6 years ago. The primary holder was Ruth Morrison, deceased. "I remember Mrs. Morrison," Patricia said softly. "She came in every few months to add something to her box, always dressed nicely, always asked about my grandchildren." Her voice caught. I was sorry to hear she passed. Patricia led me through a security door and down a hallway lined with framed photographs of Austin's history. We stopped at a vault entrance. She entered a code, and the heavy door swung open with a sound like a sigh. Rows of metal boxes lined every wall, small ones near the ceiling, larger ones at floor level. Patricia guided me to Section 4, Row 17, a medium-sized box at chest height. She inserted her key, waited for me to insert mine, and turned them simultaneously. As she prepared to leave me alone, Patricia hesitated at the door. She looked back with an expression I could not quite read. "Mrs. Morrison asked me to tell you something," she said. "If you ever came. She said to tell you not to cry, tell her to fight." Those were her exact words. Then Patricia was gone, and I was alone with whatever Ruth had hidden. My hands trembled as I slid the metal drawer from the wall. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it to a private viewing table in the corner, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The room smelled like metal and secrets. Inside the box, documents were arranged in neat stacks, each secured with a rubber band. Ruth's handwriting labeled every bundle: Will original, Gerald loans, Teresa debts, Kevin business, and at the bottom a cream-colored envelope with a single word written in Ruth's careful script: Eliza. Ruth had not just collected evidence, she had built a case. Every document was dated, every amount was noted. Every broken promise was recorded. This was not paranoia. This was protection. This was a grandmother who knew her family would come for her granddaughter, and she spent her dying months making sure I would have weapons to fight back. I pressed my hand against the cold table to steady myself. Tucked beneath the first stack, I found a photograph. Ruth and me at my college graduation, both of us smiling, her arm around my shoulders. I turned it over. On the back, in Ruth's handwriting, "My proudest day, my best girl. Never forget what you are worth." I opened the bundle labeled Gerald Loans. Inside were bank statements going back 15 years. Highlighted lines showed transfer after transfer from Ruth's account to Gerald's. $10,000 here, $5,000 there, $20,000 in a single month. A handwritten summary page listed the cumulative total: $87,000 over 15 years. Not one payment was ever returned. Each loan had a corresponding note from Ruth describing Gerald's promise to repay as soon as business picks up. Teresa's bundle was even thicker. Credit card statements listing Ruth as guarantor, a forged signature on a car loan application, evidence of a store account opened in Ruth's name without her knowledge. Ruth documented the moment she discovered Teresa's identity theft. A collection agency had contacted her about a debt she never incurred. Ruth paid it quietly to protect her credit. Teresa never apologized. Teresa never even knew Ruth found out. Among Teresa's documents, I found a printed email that made my stomach drop. Teresa had written to Kevin 2 years ago. Mom's savings should be around $200,000. Once she is gone, we split it 3 ways, but tell Gerald he gets the house. That shuts him up and we get the cash. My sister had been planning Ruth's death like a business transaction, dividing the spoils before the body was cold. Kevin's bundle contained something worse than greed. His landscaping company was never real. There were no employees, no equipment purchases, no actual contracts. Kevin created a fake business, took Ruth's $20,000 investment, and funneled the money directly into his personal account. He filed for bankruptcy within months, which legally absolved him of repaying the business loan. Meanwhile, the money bought a boat. Ruth had hired a private investigator. The documents included a full report, bank records, photographs of the boat, registered under Kevin's mother's name to hide it from creditors. The entire scheme documented in devastating detail. A note from Ruth explained her reasoning. I considered pressing charges, but it would have destroyed Teresa's marriage, and despite everything, she is still my granddaughter. I chose to protect the family. I chose wrong. By the time I understood that, I was too sick to fight. The final page in Kevin's file was a printout from a legal website, How to Report Investment Fraud to the Texas Attorney General. Ruth had bookmarked it but never submitted a report. She saved the instructions, just in case I needed them. I carefully removed the document labeled Will Original. It was identical to the copy Margaret showed me. Ruth's signature was strong and clear. The witness signatures were legible. The notary stamp was crisp. This was the true record of Ruth's wishes. The language was simple. I leave my home at 47 Magnolia Lane, Austin, Texas, to my granddaughter Rosalind Morrison. I leave my savings account to be divided equally between Rosalind Morrison and her daughter, Eliza Morrison. I leave nothing to my son Gerald Morrison or my granddaughter Teresa Morrison, as they have already received more than their share during my lifetime. A separate note accompanied the will. I know this seems harsh, but I have given Gerald and Teresa hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. They spent it all and asked for more. Rosalind never asked for anything. She only gave. This is my way of balancing the scales. The final line made me smile despite everything. If they contest this will, show them the evidence. Let them explain to a judge why they deserve more from a woman they treated like an ATM. I suspect they will not enjoy that conversation. I saved Eliza's envelope for last. The paper was thick, cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges. Whatever Ruth wrote to my daughter was private, sacred. But Ruth left it here for me to find. She wanted me to see. Inside was a single page of handwriting and a small velvet pouch. My darling girl, Ruth wrote, we share no blood, but we share something better. We share your mother. She chose you. She fought for you. She loves you more than anyone has ever loved anyone. That makes you family. That makes you mine. Never let anyone tell you that you do not belong. You belong everywhere your mother takes you. You belong in her heart, which means you belong in mine. I opened the velvet pouch with shaking fingers. Inside was a small gold locket. I pressed the clasp, and it opened to reveal 2 photographs. Ruth as a young woman on one side, Eliza at 5 years old on the other, grinning with her missing front teeth. For the first time since this nightmare began, I cried. Not from grief, from love. I checked my phone. 11:58. Teresa would be at the house in 2 minutes. I could not possibly make it back in time. But maybe that was okay. Maybe showing up to an empty house would send a message. Silence as the first act of resistance. My phone buzzed with texts. Teresa first. Where are you? We waited for an hour. This is so typical of you. Then Gerald. Answer your sister. We need to discuss the timeline. The realtor wants to photograph the house tomorrow. Be there at 9. This is not a request. I did not reply. I placed the documents back in the safety deposit box, keeping only Ruth's will, the graduation photograph, and Eliza's envelope. Evidence I would need. Memories I would cherish. As I locked the box and slipped the key back into my purse, my phone rang. Not Teresa. Not Gerald. An unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice came through, warm but serious. Is this Rosalind Morrison? This is Evelyn Porter. Margaret Chen said you might be calling, but I wanted to reach you first. Can we meet today? There is something about your grandmother you need to know. I walked out of the bank into the bright Austin sun. I had evidence. I had options. I had allies I did not know existed. And somewhere, Ruth was watching. I stood on the sidewalk outside First Heritage Bank with my phone pressed to my ear, listening to a woman I had never met ask me to trust her. The midday sun beat down on my shoulders. Traffic hummed past on Congress Avenue. And Evelyn Porter, Ruth's neighbor of 30 years, was telling me there were things I needed to understand before making any decisions about my future. Her voice was warm but serious, the voice of someone who had lived long enough to stop wasting time on pleasantries. She said Ruth talked about me constantly in those final years. She said Ruth made her promise things. She said my grandmother would have wanted us to talk. I asked where she wanted to meet. My house, Evelyn replied. The one next door to Ruth's. The one that is for sale. I will make tea. I have photographs. And I have something Ruth wanted you to have. I agreed without hesitation. 20 minutes. I would be there. The drive to Magnolia Lane felt different this time. I was not going home to pack boxes or surrender territory. I was going to meet an ally I did not know I had. Evelyn's house was a craftsman bungalow with blue shutters and a wraparound porch, sitting right next to Ruth's property. A for sale sign stood in the front yard, the same sign that had been there for weeks without me paying attention. I had been so focused on my own crisis that I never wondered who was selling or why. Ruth's house looked different from this angle, smaller somehow. The oak tree in the backyard stretched its branches over both properties, connecting them like old friends holding hands. The door opened before I could knock. Evelyn Porter was 72 years old, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing gardening gloves and a flour-dusted apron. She looked like she had been interrupted mid-task and did not mind at all. You have Ruth's eyes, she said immediately. She always told me you were the only one who looked at her the way she deserved to be looked at. Come in. I just pulled scones from the oven. Her home was warm and cluttered in the best way. Books stacked on every surface. Plants crowding the windowsills. Photographs covering an entire wall. A life fully lived, displayed without apology. As I stepped inside, a framed photograph on the entryway table caught my attention. Ruth and Evelyn, maybe 20 years younger, standing arm in arm in front of Ruth's oak tree. Behind them, barely visible in the background, stood Gerald. He was looking at the camera with an expression I could not quite name. Hunger, maybe, or calculation. Even then, he was measuring what he might take. Evelyn led me to a sunny kitchen with yellow curtains and herbs growing in mason jars on the windowsill. She poured tea into mismatched cups and slid a plate of warm scones across the table. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had hosted 1,000 difficult conversations. She told me how she and Ruth became close after Ruth's husband died. 2 widows on the same street, both with families who visited less than they should. They had tea every Sunday. They watched each other's houses. They shared secrets they could not tell anyone else. Your grandmother was afraid, Evelyn said bluntly. Not of dying. She was ready for that. She was afraid of what Gerald would do to you once she was gone. She saw how he treated you, how Teresa treated you. She spent her last years trying to protect you from beyond the grave. I asked why Ruth never said anything directly, why she never confronted Gerald, why she allowed them to take advantage of her for so long. Evelyn sighed. Because Ruth believed in family, even when family did not believe in her. She kept hoping Gerald would change, that Teresa would grow up. She waited too long. Her voice hardened, but she stopped waiting before she died. That is why she came to me. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. Ruth asked me to do something for her, a favor. She asked me to sell my house to you, if you ever needed it. She made me promise. I set down my teacup too hard. tea splashed onto the tablecloth. Evelyn simply handed me a napkin and continued. 6 months before she died, Ruth came to Evelyn with a plan. She knew Gerald would try to take her house. She knew the legal battle would be ugly. She wanted me to have an escape route, a home Gerald could never touch. Ruth gave Evelyn $20,000 as a deposit. She asked Evelyn to hold the house off the market until I was ready. If I never needed it, Evelyn would keep the deposit and sell to someone else. But if I came asking, Evelyn would sell to me first, at a fair price. "I have been waiting," Evelyn said. "When Margaret called this morning, I knew. Ruth was right. You need this house, and I need to keep my promise." She quoted the price. It was below market value. Generous, almost suspiciously so. I started to protest, but Evelyn waved me off. "Ruth's deposit covers the difference. She wanted you to have this. She wanted you to have choices." Then Evelyn pulled an envelope from her apron pocket. "Ruth also asked me to give you this. She wrote it the week before she passed. She said you would know when to open it." I took the envelope with careful hands. Ruth's handwriting on the front read, "For Rosalind, when the path becomes clear." I did not open it. Some things deserved ceremony. Deserved the right moment. I would read it tonight, when the house was quiet and Ruth's words could fill the silence. I asked about the California buyer Margaret mentioned, the cash offer that created such urgency. Evelyn laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "There is no California buyer," she admitted. "I invented him." Margaret helped me spread the rumor. We needed to create urgency. We needed you to act before Gerald could interfere. She explained what happened 2 months ago. Gerald showed up at her door unannounced with a real estate agent. He offered to buy her house. He said he wanted to expand Ruth's property. He said he would give her a fair price. Evelyn refused. "I told him I would rather burn this house to the ground than sell it to him," she said calmly. He did not take it well. He called me a bitter old woman. He said I would regret disrespecting the Morrison family. Gerald came back a week later, alone this time. He stood on Evelyn's porch and warned her she was making a mistake, that she did not understand who she was dealing with, that he had friends who could make her life difficult. "Your father is not just greedy," Evelyn said, her eyes meeting mine. "He is desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. Ruth knew that. That is why she planned so carefully. That is why you need to move quickly." I ran the numbers in my head, my savings, my income, my credit score. A mortgage was possible, tight but possible. I would have to cut expenses, cancel streaming services, cook more meals at home, but I could do it. Evelyn sensed my calculation. She offered terms, a 30-day close, flexible on the exact date. She would leave most of the furniture if I wanted it. She just needed time to ship her personal belongings to Seattle, where her children lived. I thought about what this meant. If I bought Evelyn's house, I had a home Gerald could not touch. I could let him sell Ruth's house and pay off his debts. I could let him think he won. And I would be right next door watching, thriving, building a life on land he tried to steal from me. This was not retreat. This was repositioning. More importantly, Eliza would have stability, a home with a yard, a neighborhood where people like Evelyn watched out for each other, a place that belonged to us, free and clear. Evelyn added something quietly. "Ruth told me about your daughter. She showed me pictures. She said Eliza reminded her of you at that age. Quiet, brave, trying so hard to be invisible so she would not be a burden." Evelyn reached across the table and took my hand. "Buy this house. Let that little girl learn she does not have to disappear." I looked around the kitchen, the yellow curtains, the herb garden, the photographs of a life well lived. This could be my kitchen, my life, my fresh start. I looked at Evelyn and said the words that changed everything. "I want to buy your house." Her smile transformed her face, made her look 20 years younger. "Good," she said. "Ruth would be so proud. Now let us talk about closing dates, and let us discuss how we are going to handle your father." Before we could begin, my phone erupted. Text after text flooding the screen, all from Teresa. "Where are you?" "Dad is furious. We waited for an hour." This is so typical. You always have to make everything difficult. Then Gerald, "Your sister told me you were not home. We need to discuss the timeline. The realtor wants to photograph the house tomorrow. Be there at 9 in the morning. This is not a request." Then one final message. From Diane, my mother, who had been silent since her incomplete apology. "I know you found Ruth's letter. I know you went to the bank. Please, sweetheart, do not do anything rash. Your father has a plan. Just trust him. Trust us. It will all work out." I read my mother's words 3 times. Diane knew about the bank. Diane knew about Ruth's letter, which meant Gerald knew, which meant they had been watching my movements, tracking me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I turned off my phone. I looked at Evelyn. How fast can we close? Through the kitchen window I could see Ruth's house. My house. The house they wanted to steal. But here, in this warm kitchen, surrounded by the smell of scones and the memory of a grandmother who loved me enough to plan for my survival, I was building something they would never see coming. 3 weeks of pretending nearly broke me. Every morning I moved through Ruth's house with cardboard boxes and packing tape, playing the role of a woman preparing to surrender. I wrapped dishes in newspaper. I folded linens into storage bins. I labeled everything with a black marker in clear, defeated handwriting. Anyone watching would see a daughter who had finally accepted her place. None of it was real. The boxes were mostly empty. The labels meant nothing. I was performing compliance for an audience that checked on me constantly, waiting for any sign of rebellion. Every afternoon while Gerald believed I was packing, I drove to Margaret Chen's office downtown. We reviewed loan documents. We completed title searches. We scheduled home inspections. The machinery of property transfer churned quietly, invisibly, beyond my family's awareness. Margaret handled every detail with the precision of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. Evelyn played her part perfectly. The for sale sign remained in her yard, maintaining the illusion of an open market. She told curious neighbors she was reviewing offers, taking her time, considering her options. No one suspected that the buyer had been chosen months ago by a dead woman who refused to let her granddaughter lose everything. I had never been good at deception. I was raised to be transparent, accommodating, honest to the point of self-destruction. But I was learning. Ruth taught me from beyond the grave that sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Sometimes the best revenge is letting your enemies believe they have already won. Gerald came to Ruth's house every 3 days. He walked through the rooms like a landlord inspecting a rental property, checking windows, opening closets, counting the boxes I had packed. He measured my obedience in cardboard and tape.